Hey, what is up, my friends and fellow busy bees? So, as a new furniture flipper, you'll inevitably come across today's topic at some point in your journey in painting furniture, and you may not have ever encountered it prior. I certainly hadn't. So, I wanted to dedicate an episode to going over what it is, how it comes to be, and what you can do to address it and how to avoid it in the future. Some of you may know it already, but it's called bleed through. And it has, at different times, caused me to want to pull a hair or two out of my head in frustration, not gonna lie. Because I didn't know what it was at the time. So hopefully if you hadn't come across it yet, today's episode will help you to make sure that you're well equipped to handle it if and when you do. So what exactly is bleed through? Like the title suggests, it essentially looks like a grease stain poking through your stain or paint finish. It can be in different shapes depending on the piece, so sometimes it'll just look like smaller dots in a bit of a cluster, and other times you'll see streaks or a blob somewhere on your piece. And no matter how many coats of paint you put over it trying to cover it up, the darn thing will just keep pestering you and poking its way through. It's super fun like that. I can specifically remember one piece that I was working on in the first couple of months of doing furniture makeovers. It was just a small coffee table that had some detailing on the side. So I had stained the top of the piece and was painting the base in white chalk paint. The shape of the piece leaned in the realm of a farmhouse feel to me, so I was doing some light distressing on the edges of the base, kind of where it would normally get some more wear and tear just to make it look kind of worn in and used, like on the high points. But I remember painting the base and having it look great and then going to work on another piece while it dried, and I came back a couple hours later and looked at it and I was like, wait, I swear this section looked opaque before. But now there was a spot where I could see basically the original finish through the paint, so it looked like I hadn't gotten as good of coverage in that spot, or maybe that the paint was too watered down to cover it properly. But again, I could have sworn that it was good before, but then I was like, maybe I turned it the other way and I was looking at the other side. So whatever, I added another coat to the whole piece, and again, the same thing happened. Instead of assuming I was going insane, I decided to Google it, and I discovered this whole bleed through situation. Since that piece was nearly complete and the thought of sanding it all back to properly prep it seemed like a bummer, I actually just ended up doing some more substantial distressing on the piece and distressed that area so that it didn't matter as much. But I always keep that piece in my mind when working with certain woods so that I don't take the lazy girl way out like I like to do in most areas of my life, TBH, because I would hate for that to happen to a piece that ends up in a client's home. So more scientifically speaking, this bleed through is the wood tannins, or oils in the wood, poking through the finish that you put on your furniture piece. It happens on solid wood furniture since wood is a natural material and in the wild, the tannins in the wood are what protects it from getting attacked by insects or getting infected with a fungus or something similar. So it's basically acting as a repellent to any predators or things like that. Kind of like, I don't know, a skunk spraying you. I don't know. Why do I always try and think of these metaphors? I don't need a metaphor, because I don't even think them through enough. So anyway, since the different species of wood have so much variation in terms of the patterns in their grains and their colors and textures, this is why you don't see the bleed through in a consistent shape or size. It just really depends on what type of wood is underneath it and essentially how it's feeling that day. Now, there are certain woods that are more prone to bleed through due to this, so you can have a bit of presumed forewarning when you're working on a piece if you can figure out what wood species you're working with, and thus determine whether you need to do the steps to avoid it, which we'll talk about later in the episode. Some wood species that have higher concentrations of wood tannins are dark redwoods like mahogany and cherry, as well as walnut and oak. Some woods, such as pine and cedar, are more knotty, Knotty. So those are the circles that you see in the wood that are typically darker than the rest of it and then kind of like, I don't know, circular. And they often have concentrations of wood tannins and sap and resins, which can cause bleed through. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but I see it all the time. My husband and I recently had a like a getaway at a hotel that's an old mill, very old, 1800s, and it's been renovated, but anywhere that they had painted their trim or banisters or anything white, you could very clearly see the bleed through in the pine knots because they were just like little yellow circles all over the place. And if you have trouble identifying wood species, it's still something that I struggle with from time to time. The kind of like regular ones that you see most often, I'm getting better at understanding the wood grains and kind of what it means and their colors and all that stuff. But something that had really helped me in developing that skill and something that I refer back to when I'm trying to figure out what kind of wood I'm working with is the Furniture Bible, which I have mentioned previously, I think in the Furniture Flippers Holiday Gift Guide, but I'll link it in the show notes as well. It's just a coffee table book, but it pretty much has an overview of everything you need to know about furniture refinishing and restoration. And it has photos that have basically examples of all the common wood species that you could come across. Super, super helpful, especially because like I don't have a good memory in that way. So even if I like see it and I can identify it, I'm like, oh, I know what that is. Putting like the right word to it doesn't always happen in my brain. So it's a good reference material to have on hand. Highly recommend. There's so much other information in that book as well. And so with bleed through, it is often on lighter colors that you see it most often, like whites and other lighter shades. And this is because blacks and other super dark pigments do a better job at hiding it. So sometimes it will still be there, but you won't be able to see it as much until you look at the piece in a certain light or at a certain angle, or sometimes it will hold it from coming through at all. But on the lighter colors, the tannins could look yellow, like I mentioned in the pine, but they also can be pink, which is commonly seen with cherry and mahogany, those redwoods. And I've also seen kind of like brown and more orangey tones. The most pesky thing about bleed through is that although it can start to show up immediately once the finish has first dried on your piece, sometimes it can take hours, days, or even weeks to show up. Which means that although a piece can look good as new and you stage, photograph, list, and sell it to a client, they could get that piece home and then a couple weeks later start to notice that coming through. And they might even assume it was something that they've done. Did they spill something on it? Did the kids place a greasy croissant on it when you specifically told them that it was off limits? So because of the dubious nature of this phenomenon, this concept, I recommend always assuming that your wood pieces could have this happen to them and prepping the piece accordingly to ensure that we are curbing it before it happens. As an example of this, I'm sitting in my basement currently, and as I record this, to my left we have a pole, or like, well, not that kind of pole, but a pillar, I guess, in the middle of the room, and it was painted before the previous owners moved out in the summer of 2019, and just the other day I noticed that there's bleed through peeking through from the knots in the wood underneath. Realistically, it's probably been there for a few months or whatever, and I just never noticed it, but that goes to show you that even if you think you're in the clear, years later, it could even start to show itself. Like I said, she's a pesky bitch. And before we get to how to avoid or deal with bleed through, I just want to say, if this is all new information to you, whether you're just starting out flipping furniture or whether you've been doing it for a while now but you didn't fully know what all this was, don't worry about it. We can get in our own heads and start questioning work that we've done, wondering if it was good enough quality, regretting decisions we've made, or feeling ill-equipped. And if that's the case, just take a deep breath in and exhale those worries away. All I want you to worry about is your work moving forward, because now that we've learned, we will adapt moving forward. That's all we can do. And if anything happened to a previous piece that someone was super pissed about, they probably would have reached out to you anyways, so rest assured that everything is probably good to go, but moving forward we can do better to make sure that we have the utmost quality in the pieces that we're providing. And if you had been thinking about trying out your own first furniture makeover, but you're now getting a bit freaked out or worried that you won't be able to accomplish it because there's things like this that you need to think about and be aware of, and you're wondering if there's anything else that you ought to know about but haven't learned about yet, again, don't worry. We live and we learn, but if you were looking for a step-by-step manual to help walk you through your first furniture upcycling project, let me remind you that you can always grab my No BS guide to your first furniture makeover, available on my website, MelDidItHerself.ca, or linked in the description of this episode. It walks you through my framework step by step for completing your first furniture makeover, whether you want to paint, stain, or some combination of the two on your piece. It also comes with my first furniture makeover supplies checklist, which will make sure that you're set up for success when it comes time for you to sit down and finally tackle that piece of furniture I just know you've had sitting around in your garage for ages with the intention to flip, but you've been nervous to take that leap in case you screw it up. With this guide, I will take your hand, pump your tires up, and get you rolling through from start to finish on that beautiful furniture makeover I know you have in you. This is meant to be enjoyable and fun and a creative outlet, so let me take the guesswork and research time out, and you can just use my proven, tried and true approach to furniture upcycling and my tips and tricks for getting it to turn out looking great and bringing your vision to life. So now that we know exactly what these wood tannins are, what they look like, and when they're most likely to appear, how do we avoid having them show up in the first place? The answer is proper prep work. The thing I always encourage people not to get lazy about and skimp out on. Even I don't skip it, okay? So you can't skip it either because I'm pretty lazy and I don't do that. I take the time, I do it right, and it pays off. For a detailed breakdown on every step I recommend doing to ensure that you're prepping your pieces effectively, be sure to check out episode 7, Why Prep is So Important and How to Do It Effectively, which I will link in the description of this episode because it goes into more detail than I will spend time on here today. The main focus that will make the biggest difference to stop bleed through from happening during the prepping process is adding a layer to block those wood tannins from coming through before we even get to adding the paint or stain we want to use on the piece. This means adding a primer of some sort that's specifically made to block stains out. This could mean wood tannins or odors in the piece. A commonly used primer for this is the Zinsser bin shellac-based primer. You can get it in a container or a spray can, depending on how you prefer to apply it. Although the spray can is definitely quicker and has easier cleanup, it does have a strong scent, so make sure you're in a well-ventilated space when using it and wear your respirator to protect your lungs. Also make sure to wear gloves in case it gets on your hands because she sticks. The downside to using the spray can formula is that depending on the size of the piece you're working on, this can get pricey if you need to use multiple cans to get a thorough enough coating on the piece. Like I mentioned, there is also a version that you can apply with a brush or a roller, and it's a really thin consistency, so I do find that the container goes pretty far and it applies it quite nicely. But since the bin primer is white, it's also a helpful way to get your piece painted a lighter color by giving you a light base to work off of. However, if you plan to distress your furniture piece after it's painted, you likely won't want to use a white primer underneath unless you want to distress to uncover white. If you're hoping to see wood when you distress the edges, you can instead choose a clear shellac, which again you can get in a spray can. I'm actually not sure if you could get a liquid version just because I've never looked for it, but I'm almost certain that it does exist. And this basically creates an invisible clear barrier between the wood and the paint to keep those wood tannins at bay. So that's how you properly prep to avoid bleed through, but what if you find it on a piece that you're already working on and that's why you clicked into this episode? I would recommend going the clear shellac spray route in that case because it will allow you to spot treat the bleed through. Although that's not to say that it couldn't show up in the future in other spots on the piece, so be aware of that. And then just let it dry completely. And then you can scuff sand whatever finish it was that the tannins peeked through and either go in with a new coat of primer if needed or with the finish that you used previously. With that clear shellac barrier, you hopefully and shouldn't have any issues with that spot anymore. And something that you may not know about me, I love little motivational messages. They literally always get me fired up, and I keep a running list of ones that are especially catchy or speak to me in the notes app on my phone. So I'm going to end every podcast episode with one of those that I've noted down over the years in hopes that you leave our time here each week feeling inspired, motivated, and ready to take on whatever comes your way this week. So this week's Mel's motivational message is, disappointment ends the day you adopt a learning mindset. So what does that even mean? If you find yourself disappointed and feeling sorry for yourself and like you're incompetent or like you don't know what you're doing when you're doing these furniture makeovers and you come across things like maybe bleed through or some other barrier that you need to surmount or something that you need to fix or repair, or you come across something that you've never seen before, Don't look at it as, I screwed up, I don't know what I'm doing, I shouldn't be doing this, I never should have taken this project on in the first place, who do I think I am? And all those other intrusive, negative, unhelpful thoughts that can come into our head. The day that you look at that and you decide that you're going to take that as a learning opportunity, as a way to grow, as a way to learn new things and figure out how to be able to fix it or repair it so that the next time you encounter it, you'll know what it is that you're doing and you'll know how to deal with it quickly and easily without even having to research it. That's the day that your disappointment will end, because any sort of barrier that you experience, any bump in the road, you'll see it as an opportunity to learn and to grow and to improve yourself. If you receive my weekly newsletter, the Friday Furniture Focus, you have seen the weekly Q&A section with different furniture artists that I feature. And one of the questions that I always ask, because I think it's great to hear everybody's perspective on it, is what's a piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's just starting out on their furniture refinishing journey? And so many people say a different variation of just jump in and do things and learn as you go, because that's the only way that you're gonna figure things out and figure out what you need to learn. Because it's truly just about encountering those challenges and then setting out to figure out how to fix them and how you can avoid them in the future. Or maybe you do it one way and then you find out that there's a quicker or easier or cheaper repair that you could have done, so you try that out next time. But if you encounter these challenges and you just see it as defeating and you start feeling shitty about yourself or feeling shitty about your furniture, you're just going to get discouraged and you're not going to either finish that piece or want to return to do another piece or take on new pieces in the future because you're worried about, what sort of things they might uncover and you might have to deal with. And like I said, this is supposed to be something that's enjoyable, that's fun, that's a creative outlet. And the only way that we're going to be able to ensure that it continues to be that way is if we are intentional with our mindset, because it really is all about mindset. That's why I include these motivational messages every week, because I want you to go into the week, into, the weekend, and then the week following with a positive mindset and a intentional one to really keep that positivity up and to continually work on keeping it that way, because it doesn't just happen inherently. The large majority of us do inherently go to that negative place, but it's the people who catch it quickly and are able to turn it around and find the positive in it, find the growth opportunity. They're the ones that end up feeling great at the end of the day, even if things don't turn out the way that they had hoped they would be. Their disappointment ends because they have adopted a learning mindset and they know that that is just taking them one step closer to where they need to go. It's just teaching them one more lesson that they need to learn to help them in the future and help them continue to rise. So take that learning mindset with you in your work, in your personal life, and anytime that you encounter something that's less than ideal, that's a bit of an annoyance or a bump in your road throughout your day, look at it with the perspective of, is there something that I can learn from this? Is there something that I can do differently next time? And your day will be so much better in the long run as a result. All right, that's it for now. I appreciate your time, and I'll catch you guys next week.